I'm being held hostage in a production office. I've been here for 4 days. I've been surviving on face cream and toothpaste, which is why I'm looking good. And my teeth are clean, which is a small blessing, a tiny blessing in an emergency situation, really. Basically, the door's it's completely locked. I can't get out. There's a few arty posters, and I've tried to eat a few hole punch bits of tiny little bit of hole punch paper. I thought that might be easier to masticate and digest, just to keep the wolf from the door. But I am starting to feel a little bit delirious. But more than anything, what I'm really starting to panic about is I'm not going to make it to the space reunion. I mean, apart from what kind of mental torture they might have prepared for me, the fact that I can't be there for the marathon is basically making me go insane. We wrote Spaced for you. Oh my God, there's somebody coming. No, there isn't. Hello? Hello? Help! Just ignoring me. I think it's some kind of conspiracy, I don't know. We wrote Spaced for you. Because we love you. Yeah, all right, God, finally, yeah. Admitting it, we do. We love you very much. And the fact that I can't be here, where you are now, today, yeah, I'm really upset about it. And I really, I don't want you to miss me too much. A little bit, yeah, sure, a little bit. Miss me a little bit. But basically, my major concern at this point is getting out of this office. So I think I might jump, but it looks quite far down. Anyway, I love you, all of you, you weirdos. Goodbye.
Let us introduce onto the stage then Simon Pegg and Edgar Wright. Okay, let us then go back to the day that you first met Simon and Edgar. What was it like?
Well, there's a slight disagreement in this, in that I think it was the Battersea Arts Centre, but you think it was the Riverside.
It's definitely the Riverside.
It's always the way, isn't it, with love affairs? You never
We were at...
You had a velvet jacket on, I remember that.
It was 1995, and it was Matt Lucas and David Walliams were doing one of the Sir Bernard Chamley shows at Riverside, and they were there, and Katie and Jess were there, and you were there. So I think I'd already met Jess, but I remember because I'd seen Simon on the stand-up show doing a routine about Points West, regional West Country station, and being from the West Country as well, I felt like he was speaking directly to me. So I went up and told him that.
Yeah, and you had a goatee at the time.
Yes.
You look so young.
Yeah.
I mean, Edgar, anyways, has the gift of always looking very young. But imagine what he looked like in 1995. Like a child with a beard. And, he came up, and I remember kind of like just not knowing what to make of him in a way. It was sort of, he was very knowledgeable and enthusiastic, and kind of, I was kind of like, yeah, all right. And I wasn't used to having people come up and say, things like that, because I hadn't done any television and stuff, so I don't know, it was a kind of weird thing. And then it just, after that, was always kind of around, and he started working with Matt and Dave, and then I started to think, oh yeah, maybe he's like a proper human. As opposed to a velvet jacketed child with a beard.
Well, I am not now.
No, you are, even more so now. But, and then, eventually I ended up realising exactly how talented he was, and then I exploited it.
So this was, you worked together on Asylum.
Yeah.
That's right.
That was your first professional engagement.
Yeah, that's right. And I think the first time we met again after the Riverside was when it was like a rehearsal for Asylum, which was another Paramount show. So Simon had been, that's where I worked with Jess first, actually. I worked with Jess before Simon on Matt and Dave's first sketch show, which was called Mash and Peas, which is very silly. And so, and then immediately after that, a couple of months after that, did the show Asylum, which featured Jessica. And in fact, Simon got Jessica onto the show because a few people kind of dropped out after the first meeting. And Jessica was one of the people that you suggested to come in.
Well, I've just done a show called 6 Pairs of Pants with Jessica, which is a kind of regional...
And Katie.
And Katie as well. Katie was in it. In fact, Katie brought Jess along, I think. Are you here, Katie? You brought Jess along. Yeah, Jess kind of came with Katie to the audition, and then they said, well, we'll have them both. And I knew Katie from university. We'd been at university together, and with Dave Williams as well. And so, you know, there was that little network going on. It wasn't incestuous at all. It was just sort of coincidental. But yeah, it was.
Bristol Mafia.
Yeah, the Bristol.
That's the thing. I'm from the West Country as well, and so was Bill Bailey. So after that, we started to think that there was a West Country Mafia.
It's a veritable wellspring of talent, basically. If you live anywhere near Stonehenge, you're in. It's the ley lines, believe me. It's nothing to do with talent. But yeah, and then I'd work with Jess, and I'd love.
Who thought the West Country could be incestuous?
Not my own sister. But I'd worked with Jess, and I knew. I mean, I'd known Katie for a long time, so I knew how great she was, and then working with Jess, I kind of was, you know, it was like meeting this fantastic little sprite who, you know, was a few years younger than me, but was just dazzlingly talented and kind of beguiling, and I just completely fell in love with her. And I when all the Christians pulled out of asylum because it was faintly. It was about mental people, kind of. I don't know. There was a slight sort of moral objection to the content of asylum because it was set in an institution, and I don't think there was a number of people that came along to the first workshop who didn't kind of get the joke that it wasn't in any way a comment about mental health. It was just a sort of situation comedy, literally. And we were short of a few people, and I suggested Jess, and so she came in, and that's how Asylum became the first thing that the three of us worked on together.
And you and Jess stood out enough from that to be. Did someone there suggest that you work together and come up with something of your own?
Yeah.
Was it simple as that?
Yeah, I think it was pretty. It was Family Moore who was at Paramount. And there was definitely like.
And at university with me and Katie, but that's not the point.
No nepotism. But yeah, that was in Asylum. Sort of like Simon and Jess kind of like ended up doing a lot of scenes together, and they worked really well. So then it was kind of suggested that you two write something together.
Yeah. Although I think at first it was, as I said earlier on, it was offered to us as a kind of, can we make a vehicle for you both, in a slightly sort of directionless way. But I think Jess and I were of a mind that, you know, we knew nothing of the industry, and we just kind of said, yeah, well, let us make it then. And it kind of ended up along the whole route. It was like that, you know. It was our naivety that carried us through just assuming it would get made. And you know, I've told the story. I think if you've seen the documentary on the DVD, but with the first meeting we had with the Channel 4 commissioner, and he said, "How many episodes do you want to do?" We went, 6. And it was Graham Smith, and he's a great guy. And I think he was kind of just new, and he thought, "What about 7?" You know, because I have that power. And we went, okay. Which is why there's this odd thing of like a series of 7 episodes. That's why how that came about. So the whole thing was very sort of, I don't know, serendipitous in a way. Just sort of, and these days you would never, space would not get made today. You'd have to make a pilot, and it would have to be, you'd have to do a rehearsed reading. And I mean, we were so lucky to make a show without any kind of pilot or anything. It was just, it went straight into production. And it was at a time, I think, when Channel 4 were just really taking risks, you know, and these days, obviously the television market is very competitive, and they're being a bit more guarded, and that doesn't happen so much, or at all, actually. But I think we were probably the last series for that to happen.
Did you get the feeling from Channel 4 that they were kind of thinking, well, we can get some young people to watch this? I mean, did you feel that there was that kind of...
LWT we did.
LWT, particularly, there was kind of demographic pressure.
Yeah.
To appeal to the kids.
There was a moment Edgar was nearly sacked.
Oh yeah, I kind of refused to show the rushes to one of the executive producers from LWT, just because I thought he wouldn't understand it, and I didn't want to have to. I don't know. We literally didn't do a pilot, and we went straight into making it. And even just watching that first episode back there, I remember like the first shot was like when they come into the flat and get shown around, and I just remember that I don't really like having to explain what I'm doing, because I'd rather just kind of plow on and keep doing more stuff rather than having to kind of justify everything. So I rather naively, I was only like 24 when I did Space, and I sort of said, I don't want the executive producers to watch any rushes. And so they were threatening me with the sack at one point. So, but it was good actually. I mean, in a similar serendipitous way, like you know, Simon and Jess were very, you know, sort of kind to kind of have me in mind right from the start and got me involved. But then also, I got Naira Park involved, who then has gone on to produce the whole of 2 series and our films as well. And that's because I'd worked with her on one of the Matt and Dave things. So it definitely was definitely powered along by its own naivety. There's definitely I watch it, even just watching some of the episodes now, it tires me out watching it, because it kind of was. It was so complicated for a low budget show, and I think that's one of the reasons we didn't really get any interference from Channel 4 or LWT, really, is because it was very, very low budget, and so in a way we got kind of left alone, which was good.
Did both of you watch The Young Ones when it was on?
Yeah.
The same excitement as I did, because you're both slightly younger than me, but nevertheless, I imagine you both saw it and thought, wow, somebody's made a sitcom for me. Is that right?
Absolutely.
I always remember that there's certain comedy shows that are just like always come like extinction level events where they just kind of everything goes to kind of year zero again. And it's always funny, especially when we've gone to the States and done press for like Sean and Hot Fuzz. People always kind of like go back to say, "Oh, you guys must be big Monty Python fans," and you kind of think, "Well, I am," but like sort of, I was of the age when The Young Ones was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen, and then kind of like 10 years later, you know, The Day to Day was like the most amazing thing I'd ever seen. So I think there's definitely kind of like there's shows, you know, that you know, I thought felt the same way about The Goodies.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
I'm not kidding. I'm not being ironic.
That's the thing you always get in America, is that they all say, "You must be a huge fan of Monty Python." Like, no, that's just the last thing English that you can remember. That's why you know.
The Simpsons was a big influence in terms of just in terms of the gag rate. You know, a lot of the animated. Well, I guess at the time probably only The Simpsons before the other ones had come along. But like just the gag rate of something like The Simpsons was really influential in terms of trying to kind of even half match that.
Yeah.
You know, with just the sort of the speed of it, and also the fact that The Simpsons didn't really, for such a popular show. I mean, obviously Space is a lot more culty than The Simpsons, but The Simpsons never talked down to anybody, and you know, so that was definitely a big influence as well.
What about the writing process? Because you and Jessica have not written a sitcom before. This is your first sitcom, so you know, episode 1 is the work of 2 novice sitcom writers, and yet it holds together. It holds together like any other sitcom. You know, they will always be called anarchic and surreal, but it actually has an A plot and a B plot, and it has an ending, and it pays off, and as they all do. So somehow or other, you managed to write a proper sitcom, even though it's kind of shrouded in all these other elements. There's a proper sitcom there.
I think
how the fuck did you do that?
Well, that's the thing. I think again that was kind of fairly accidental in that we had. I remember going to see Jess in Nottingham in 1997. And she was in that show Staying Alive, which is a nursing drama, and we had this opportunity to write this show, and we started. The first thing we wrote was that first scene when you think they're talking to each other but they're not, and we had this kind of, I don't know, it was like a little spark, and it kind of happened and it grew from there. But the episode that we had as episode 1, when we handed it in, was really lacking in the final third. It was just not up to scratch. And I remember Edgar, really down to the wire, said, you know, we need to fix this, and we need to come up with something really special for the last part. And so we went away and we came up with that whole thing of the 5 years, 8 months, 3 days. You know, the moment when the 2 anniversaries, the big farcical moment with Brian and Marsha, and came up with that very, very close to actually shooting it. And I think that's why I would always credit Edgar as being like the third writer on the show, because his input would always come in. He was the one that threw out the lost episode of Series 2, which eventually became the episode when we go to Camden and there's all that, you know, the slow motion gunfighting that you saw. He was always a brilliant sort of, you know, quality measure for us, and kept the show very tight. So I think the first episode was very much a kind of, you know, I hate to say accident, but it does feel kind of like it came together in a very haphazard way, even though it's called a tight episode.
Well, that episode you mentioned is a lot of people's favourite episode, isn't it?
I remember it really clearly.
I think that's the best of all 7.
We were working in
14.
the second one. We were working in a office in Queen's Park, and I really remember clearly getting word from the boss that episode 5 was shit.
What happened in it?
It was like
no, I see what it was. It was because like in the second series that the characters are separated quite a lot, and there's a lot of like subplots, and not that those don't work, you know, in their own way, but there was and then episode 5, the original one, was exactly that. The whole point was the boys and girls split off, And I think I said that like we need to do an episode where it's just Tim and Daisy on an adventure because there's too much splitting off. So it was like there was that whole episode that was trashed, and then you guys wrote the Camden one very, very quickly afterwards.
Yeah, I remember going to this cafe next door to the office and just having a coffee, and it literally came out like vomit onto a notepad. You know, we can do this, we can do this, we can do this. And I'd always had this idea in my stand-up routine about the slow motion gunfighting, about, you know, this kind of telepathy between guys. They know what that is, you know, they get the moment, and but I could never translate it into a routine, and the show then became like a perfect sort of conduit to kind of get that idea across, and obviously, you know, it was a complete collaboration because Jess is a fantastic writer, so we just sort of came up with it very quickly in a couple of days, and suddenly it was what arguably, you know, one of the best episodes of the second series, if not the whole series, the whole 2 series. One of my enduring memories of Edgar coming on board is being round at Jess's flat in Queen's Park, and Edgar coming round for a meeting, which we had no idea what that meant at that time. We were in our 20s, very naive. Edgar bought a book, and he had a storyboard of the getting to know you sequence, which is, you know, in the first episode, which is I think really sets the scene for the whole series. I think that kind of, you know, those great shots of Daisy's always got her eyes like this, and the mouse spider and all that kind of stuff. And you know, in the script it was literally like the dialogue. That was all it was. And Edgar had the whole, you know, the aesthetic of it entirely in his head. And for me, that was what completely defines the show in a way, as a collaboration between myself, Jessica, and Edgar. Is the writing and the visuals coming together and existing as a, you know, as a sort of symbiotically, as opposed to just filming something which is funny, which is what you were talking about.
I think I knew as a viewer that it was good after that bit where you cry in sequence. And it's the most beautiful thing. It's poetic and silly and funny. And I just thought, yeah, I like this programme. That bloke out of the cough syrup advert's great.
Hey, that's my best
that lady out of the Kodak advert.
Yeah, I already like those two, but now I like it. And so, who's going to take the credit for that? The funny sobbing bit.
I think that might have been just
You and Jess.
Me and Jess thing, you know.
Hold on to you, I say.
Jess and I always had a kind of, you know, like a kind of, just a, what's the word, like not a second sight?
Telepathy.
Yes. I don't know.
That may not be it.
That might not be it. But we worked very well together, me and Jess. We kind of, we came up with things very much. A lot of things in that show came up on just out of nowhere. Like I have to credit our cameraman for the no, it wasn't our cameraman. It was even like one of the operators.
Oh yeah.
The Evil Dead joke, when Tim goes up to the poster and he's going like that, and there's the reflection in the Palace Pictures poster behind. That wasn't even any of our joke. That was one of the crew who came up with that. And the show, even though it was very much written and laid out before it went to in front of the camera, there was still a kind of, you know, atmosphere on set where people were throwing things in, and some really great jokes came out of just, you know, just on the day, I think.
So what did LWT say when they saw what you allowed them to see finally? Presumably the finished first episode.
Okay.
Did they like it? Did they appreciate it? What was the
I think
reaction?
for some reason we edited. I remember, like, reasons too long to go into, but I was in a foul mood after the rap party.
That's not like you.
And I, instead of starting with the first episode, I wanted to start with a sure thing. So I started editing the zombie sequence from episode 3 to cheer myself up. So I didn't start with episode 1, so we actually delivered episode 3 first, just to just to kind of confuse them even more. So that was the first episode we handed in. But one thing we did, and one thing I continue to do throughout, like, since, is that, you know, there's so many things where you can do a rough edit of something, and it doesn't have sound effects on it, doesn't have music on it, and it's kind of airless and stuff. But we spent, you know, we really worked on it, so all of the sound effects, and if not the final music, like 80% of the final music was all on there. So we delivered it to Channel 4 like that, rather than have it without music and without all the sound effects, because it kind of just didn't work without the sound effects, that sort of level. And I had that kind of idea already, but then in the edit it just got more and more and more. So I think they liked it when they saw it. I mean, LWT was sort of, it was kind of co-production between LWT and Paramount, and I guess, you know, like, Naira and family as well, like at Paramount, were kind of probably more the creative producers. So, and then, you know, Channel 4, I think they were just kind of happy to get what they got for the money, you know, so I think they were kind of pleased on that basis, you know.
Can we talk about illegal drugs? Because there are some in it, although not fairly explicitly referenced. Did you have any problems with that at any stage, with anybody at any level?
I haven't said anything about that.
I had a bad problem with it for a while.
The only thing that I said is that we couldn't have more than 2 fucks. And that was the only thing that
Yeah,
was
that was
like...
one thing watching it today was hearing Marsha say it was the fucking dog. You know, back in 1999, or was it 99 or 2000? It was, you know, nowadays Gordon Ramsay is, you know, he's built his reputation on saying that word.
Yeah.
Whereas in those days it was like we literally were allowed 2 fucks an episode. It went up to 3 for the second series.
Well done.
Yeah, but it felt like watching it today. It was like, have we paved the way for, you know, profanity?
I actually remember one of my proudest moments is when the 3rd episode with the zombie opening went out. And it used to be, for people who, anybody saw it when it first went out, but like it was in between Friends and Frasier. And we used to, when it was first went out, we used to kind of, I remember with both series, we had parties around each other's houses when it was on, and we'd sort of go around everybody else's houses. And when the 3rd episode came on, I think one of my proudest moments was Friends had just finished. And then it said, next up, Spaced, which contains violent imagery. And we went, yeah! It was just like, I love that. It goes, some strong language and violent imagery from the stars.
I compounded that, I remember, because having worked with David Schwimmer, he sent a message.
Tell him about fucking Ross.
He sent a New Year's message to me on the phone, like the year before last, saying Happy New Year. And I sent one back saying, fuck you, Ross. That was just going back to that time that when we opened after, like, 2.5 minutes after Friends finished, with someone's head exploding all over a wall.
But nobody said anything about that. Nobody said anything really about the drugs or, you know, exploding heads or...
We never said, in the 6th episode that you saw just then, clearly everyone's on ecstasy. It was, you know, it was at the height of the time when he was kind of more expensive and better. You get what you pay for. And you know, it came out at a time when, sort of an era of clubbing in the late 90s when, you know, it kind of solved everyone's problems. It was like this amazing thing. You'd always have this conversation about how great you were and how amazing it would be if all the world's leaders were on it and all this crap, you know. And but that wasn't important really. It wasn't. We were making a statement about that specific action. It was the idea that, you know, sometimes people went out to clubs, they did that particular thing, they came home and they didn't die. You know, there was always a moral judgment placed upon those actions in soap operas and in other shows. And we kind of just wanted to show you know, that sometimes you just go out and it happens, and I mean, for better or for worse, you know, it just happens. And for all the people that go out and we're going through that, we wanted to have, to the point where I remember when Nick and I went to the Big Beach Boutique gig that Fatboy Slim did in Brighton, the notorious one, and he played that track for us, the Commisera track, and I remember someone coming up to us, and it was playing across 250,000 people, and someone came up to us and said, he's playing this for you guys, and it was because he used to watch it with the Chemical Brothers before they went out to DJ on a Friday night, because it kind of got them in the mood. And that was like, that's exactly what we wanted that episode to do, which was just to kind of like pinpoint that very shared moment of, you know, naive 90s euphoria, which, you know, for better or for worse, actually happened.
You were promoting drugs.
I wouldn't know. It's not, don't do it.
No.
Not in between Friends and Frasier.
No. But there's no point in that show. There's no moment in that episode where we go, ooh. In fact, there's no moment whenever we're having a spliff or something where we go, ooh, look at, right? It's great, isn't it? It's just like,
yours, Thatch.
Up yours, Thatch. This will solve everything. It was just a kind of, the whole idea was it was just a part of a lot of people's lives and didn't need to be commented upon as an action, you know, morally.
There's lots of stuff on TV, lots of comedy stuff going on. That's on at the moment, like the Boosh, you said about the young ones and old stuff like that, but what at the moment, your friend Peter Serafinowicz obviously has his own stuff. What do you think is the real talent that's going on at the moment on TV?
I really like the Mighty Boosh. I'm looking forward to seeing the third series. I thought the second series of it was great, and I like the sort of Richard Ayoade and Matt Holness, like the Garth Marenghi sort of people. What else? Yeah, no, there's
Concords, I love Fly the Concords. Present.
But I mean, it does seem, you know, like it is a bit. And I'm talking to other people, kind of this similar age and stuff. It is a slightly dispiriting that you know, maybe you know that you. I don't know. I've talked actually to the the people who did Dark Place, and we kind of both felt the same way that like if we were making the show now, would we be allowed to make the same show that we did then now on TV? And both of us kind of thought probably not, which is kind of sad. But there is good stuff out there, and there's lots of obviously great things coming through.
That happens in America as well with like shows like Arrested Development. You know, that somehow one of the best sitcoms America has ever produced struggles past the third season. You know, and it's that thing of finding an audience or the people that love it being in any way vocal or present just by. I don't know, it's a weird thing. Often you get shows which are loved and adored, like more than any other, that last for a very brief period of time. I think Dark Place is a great example of that.
Well, we were just discussing earlier actually that it's interesting, like, because we had a chance to do a third series and we didn't at the time, but it was kind of tough with the second series because even though we were really pleased with it, it just didn't do great in the ratings, and even though it was getting really good reviews and there was already we've had a very lucky to have such a great kind of fan base.
Who's from the Spaced Outside tonight? Anybody?
There you go. Well, these guys were there from pretty much from episode 3 of like the first series, which was amazing. There was a website up like before the first series had even finished, which was crazy.
One of the best websites I've ever seen.
But what was interesting is just that in a way, like whilst it was dispiriting at the time, we put so much hard work into it, and it wasn't kind of getting the same ratings of even half the ratings of stuff on BBC Two. Now, in a weird way, because it was never huge, it's kind of probably never outstayed its welcome with anybody, whereas other shows that get really massive, reach that point where everybody gets sick of them, and that's not necessarily through the fault of the makers, that's the channels just repeating it endlessly. I mean, in Space, the second season, it was only ever repeated, only shown once on Channel 4. So I don't think we had a chance to kind of... So I think in a weird way, with stuff like, Dark Place, Arrested Development, I think, and ours, I think on DVD, hopefully will continue to live on because, so people are still discovering them. There's probably like a huge amount of people who've only ever seen Space on DVD and never saw it on TV at the time.
I know there's a massive amount of people in America that are kind of discovering Dark Place, as this sort of like gem, this kind of undiscovered beauty thing that they've just sort of come across, and that's entirely on its own merit. That's what I meant earlier on about, hopefully Spaced has kind of done that, in that people have watched it and then told their friends and then told their friends, and it's a really nice way for something to gain popularity rather than being just whatever the zeitgeist is presumed to be, I think.
Just a quick question, having referenced in Space the likes of George A. Romero, Sam Raimi and Quentin Tarantino, what's it like now to having met them and become friends with them and even collaborated with them?
It's great. I mean, I think sort of, I'm not sure whether George Romero or Sam Raimi have seen Spaced. Quentin Tarantino definitely has, and some of the people involved. Most of the people that that saw Sean and Hot Fuzz, and not everybody's seen Spaced over there. But no, it's amazing. It's really it's amazing sort of like for that to happen and sort of to be on good terms with most of them. I actually sort of like I've been such a lucky bastard like in terms of meeting all my heroes, and the one person that I hadn't met was John Carpenter. He was like the one person that we reached out to when we were doing Shaun of the Dead, and we never got to meet him, and he didn't really respond to any of our invitations. And I bumped into him the other day in Virgin Megastore, and I was just like, "Oh, you're John Carpenter," and then we had a little chat. And I was thinking, "Yes,
Got him.
got him. That's it.
It ticked him off.
I'm never gonna like. That's it. I'm done."
Edgar's now met everybody.
So, but it's great, and that side of things is fantastic, and it's really
And it's still happening as well. I got an email from Edgar the other day, which is a forward from Paul Verhoeven. He'd seen Shaun of the Dead with his wife, and he really liked it. He was like, oh my God, it's Paul Verhoeven from Robocop.
The moral is basically don't bother making television programs and just wait in HMV at some point.
Yeah, you'll
At
see.
some point, John Carter will walk in.
Are you just trying to write anything else?
Me and Jessica.
Yeah.
I'd love to write with Jess again. Yeah, Jess and I had this bizarre technique which we perfected in the second series, which was to sit opposite each other and make faces at each other, and then laugh until we pretended to stop laughing, and then make another face at each other. That was our thing. Somehow the second series was written by that. I'd love to work with her. You know, I absolutely love her, and I would love to kind of to have that thing. With Spaced, we always wanted to make something that was equally male and female, that wasn't particularly boysy, or even if it was boysy in a way that women could relate to it, and vice versa. And you don't get that unless you write with someone of the opposite sex. You know, you need to. You know, one thing Edgar and I always have a problem with when we write is really getting to the bottom of our female characters, because we're not women. You know, and I think it's really good to have.
You say that.
I say that, but you know, it's. I think it really helped Spaced in that it was very much a male-female collaboration, and I can't think of someone I'd rather write with than Jess. So who knows? I mean, it literally the specificities of it are labyrinthine. It's kind of, you know, she had a family, and me and Edgar had the opportunity to make Shaun of the Dead, and you know, it all kind of like went off in different directions. If it ever comes back to the possibility, and we're still very much friends, and you know, then I would love to write with it, but I couldn't say for definite.
Can I just ask Nick? We know that.
Look at me when you're talking.
We know that you changed Simon's life when you came into it. Did he in any way change yours?
No.
Yeah, of course. You know, I mean, I think this is about space, so it's not about
It's about space, Jim.
Simon and I's joke fest. But yeah, I mean, I was just a big thug, idiot waiter who didn't know who Woody Allen was. So, you know, he was my.
Why did he come into Chiquitas?
Yeah, he
That must have been embarrassing.
He loved the chicken soft taco. That's in his boat, but he was my Henry Higgins. He took me under his wing and you know, showed me what was good, and I showed him how to roll the fattest spliff in the world. It was a symbiosis of ideas, but you know, I don't think I would be the person I am today without Simon, and I'd like to think the same, you know? It's true.
It's good. It's good. That's all I wanted. I wanted a bit of love.
You know,
You had Mike, didn't you? Mike was your character.
Mike kind of, well, yeah, he kind of was, but he was a bit different. He was a lot older and more violent and more cynical, and he was a mixture of two friends I had. One guy called Flea, who was a line cook, he was a nice guy, but he was a Nazi. It's a big butt. But it is a big butt. He was one of those people that he was so nice. I love a big butt. He was one of those people. He was so nice. At some points, you kind of forgot. Oh, he likes the Nazis. You kind of had to forget the fact because he was so nice. So Mike was a mixture between Flea and a guy that I knew called John, who was a TA guy and part-time security guard, who was a bit tasty, who's recently got in contact with me via Facebook, and he became everything that Mike wanted to be. Let me tell you that from the Facebook. You know, he's got back in contact with me 12 years later, and you know, there are pictures of him holding a sword in Baghdad and firing a gun out of a plane.
And he's on Facebook.
And he's on Facebook.
He's made it. Can I ask Katie about Twist? Was Twist kind of formed when you saw the script, or did you find her from somewhere else?
She was
loosely based, wasn't she, on someone that we knew at university,
Yeah.
who shall remain nameless, who used to wear sort of crystals because she was allergic to broccoli, and would always, she was totally obsessed with fashion and would give you a big hug and then be label checking you and go, "Ooh, Marks and Spencer." You know, she was, but then obviously I kind of wore the shoes and the makeup and, you know, made it my own as well.
Certainly did.
She was kind of like that, though, wasn't she?
Yeah.
Bless her.
Fashionista extraordinaire, very, very self-obsessed.
Did she ever respond to the show? Did she ever watch it and see that it was her?
She still doesn't to this day know it's her. She's actually a really good friend. I feel awful.
Julia, you smoke a lot of fags throughout the episodes. They weren't real cigarettes, though, were they? Well, not like proper nicotine cigarettes. Weren't they kind of special herbal ones?
I think we started off with real ones, didn't we?
Did you?
When I thought, well,
And you realised you couldn't smoke 80 a day.
I didn't realise we did 80 takes for sure. Which is true.
Yeah.
And then we went on to herbals, which apparently burn the holes in your tongue. So
And
they
smell
burn
like
at a
poo.
higher rate and are far more dangerous, aren't they?
They stank.
Stank, yeah.
It really did. The Honey Rose cigarette, which was Julia's sort of prop of choice, was, my God, the place smelled like cow dung.
Mark, do you want to speak?
Make him speak.
What do you want to say? What do you want me to say?
Well, I was going to ask about Winley, actually.
Well, a cold. I've got a very bad cold. Like a twinge. And a bit of athlete's foot.
That's what I was going to ask you. The Brian's beard was obviously real. wasn't it?
Yes, I regret that. You know, because we have to wear that wretched thing for 6 months of the year. It was just there, wasn't it? And nothing
Yeah.
more. Just stupid.
It's got facial pubis in a way, isn't it?
And he was always trying to rest his cock on it.
We had this weird thing, this idea that Mike had a moustache, and Brian had a goatee, and Tim had the full thing, and that's why Brian and Mike were the composite parts of Tim's personality, like his artistic side and his kind of aggressive side, and you know.
Like a game of Guess Who.
It is like Guess Who. It's like a Guess Who for the naughties.
Did you think of that afterwards?
Very much so.
Post-Russian, that's good. I liked it.
For Mark and Katie and Julia, we sort of know that that Edgar and Simon and Nick are a bit fanboyish and have, you know, obviously writing it came up with a lot of the references. Was there any, like, were there any references that you didn't get and sort of just went along with, you know, okay, they're telling me to do this, so I'm going to go for it, or was that more of, did you research that? Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Sex
all of
scene
that.
that we did.
Actually, I just got some tonight because I haven't seen it since we did it, since it went out. I went, oh, I can see it. That's the when the alien things. What's the film with the
Close Encounters.
Close Encounters.
Yeah, Close Encounters.
Yeah, well done, Mark.
Not everybody will have seen that one.
Did you get
I
stuff?
got it, but it's tonight with mashed potato.
No, when we did it, did you get it?
No. I suppose we were all quite broken down, weren't we? We weren't.
Because you do things in, like, you know, you come in one morning and it's kind of cold and you got up really early and you just do something and
That sex scene that we did was fun, wasn't it? It's not then.
The weirdest thing is that,
Polaroid scene.
Polaroids.
Yeah, that was fun.
I have a memory of it being. Oh no, it was just a
Non-polaroid.
that was just a dream.
there's a
then.
weird shot of there's like loads of things with you in like some sort of like African sort of statue, and then there's a weird picture of you like sucking Mark's elbow. It looks like the most pornographic thing I've ever seen. I've got them all.
Everybody gets to
I
sleep.
didn't know what any of it was about at all, from beginning to end. I knew if they said come in the door, I could manage that. Except Edgar would say sort of like come in sort of stand there. So I understood that with the script. I didn't know from fuck what it was about. And now I think it's quite funny. See? What was that thing you told me to do? Go down to Brian's room and stand outside the outside the door.
Yeah.
What?
18 reference.
I love when a fan comes to
Yeah.
What's that? And you have to say it in a certain way anyway. Marvellous.
I remember your sort of thing, the whole thing was summed up entirely by that scene when Jess and me were in the flat for the very first time, and you're taking notes and you're asking us questions. I think it's on the DVD as an outtake where you just drawn a big cock and balls just because you were bored during the scene. This is what I think of the show.
Yeah.
It's always sick-making when you read or hear of a cast saying, "Oh, it was just such great fun to make." Was it? Or was it hard, bloody graft?
I remember the night I thought Edgar had killed himself. That wasn't a great night.
I had this was my Paris, Texas moment where lunch was called and I started walking and I kept on walking.
Really? How far did you get?
I got down, I don't know, maybe walked about like a mile and a half or something. Yeah. And then I called Naira and she said, "Where are you?" I said, "I don't know."
I don't know. How dramatic is that?
No, there was times, especially on the second series, like where the schedule. One of the things that was really tough about it was because we'd shoot all 7 episodes together, and because it was still the second series was still kind of low budget. You'd be doing scenes from all 7 episodes in one day, and then there was one day, particularly whenever we do the exterior of the house, you'd be doing bits of scenes from every single episode. And on the second series, for various reasons, our cameraman refused to do Saturdays, and so I didn't really want to lose him, so I was forced to use a different cameraman every Saturday. It was just, when you've achieved like a shorthand or somebody, it was just like a fucking nightmare having to explain it all. And particularly on the second series, I had it's happened twice in the second series, I had a complete mental breakdown.
Tantrum.
No funny punchline to that one.
No, people need to know that.
It was desperation. It wasn't about kind of throwing a hissy fit. It was about, like the day that we shot all the stuff with Dwayne, Benzie, and Tim and Daisy in the Barfly.
Yeah.
There was a band upstairs from 5, and it was all unusable. So what we ended up doing eventually was going back and reshooting it using part of the budget for some trailers.
That trailer you just saw, in fact, when they're sitting on the wall.
We knocked it off.
We said that would take us all day to film.
Yeah.
The 2 of them sitting on a wall, so we could go back and shoot a scene in secret. And Nick was the AD.
Yeah.
Nick was on set being the AD.
Yeah, it was that. Nick first AD'd the whole thing. It was that sort of, tin pot at times. And I remember it was a similar time going out at lunchtime, walking out, buying a bunch of scratch cards, and scratching them off on a wall, praying if I got £100,000, then we'd be able to, it would be easier to make the show. And I remember just at times, as much as we all loved each other and as much as it was fun to be working with your friends and making a show that you loved, at times it was soul destroying, and I think that's why we paused before, possibly making a 3rd series.
I remember though when at the end of the second series, the last thing that we did was standing outside the street in Camden. And we did that shot which is in episode 6 after they have the big argument in the restaurant. And we wrapped in Camden like at 5 o'clock in the morning, went straight to that pub that's open in Smithfield Market and continued to get hammered until 4 p.m. the next day. Various members of the cast and crew were all over London. I remember
somebody woke up in Soho Square.
Well, she's not here, she makes it as Jess. Jess woke up in Soho Square at 4 p.m.
The bottle of champagne. An empty bottle of champagne.
When you do the cultural exchange with Star Wars, Simon, do you still know all the words to the Ewok song?
Probably. I remember we were in a sound studio in Soho or something, Nick and me and Edgar singing that song. And
yeah, we couldn't clear the rights to the original
actual thing.
So we found you had a French version of it or something?
Yeah.
Some kind of French symphony orchestra doing that music, and then we sang the Ewok part.
It's like Yub Nub. Icha Yub Nub. Tommy Tamapachi. Chinuka Ting Hoya, something like that.
The key ingredient on top of the lyrics is the ones that are like falling about who are just doing wild.
But then eventually, that whole ending of the film was rubbed out by Lucas when he did the sacrilegious. Sorry. a really lovely kind of end to that whole, my whole kind of rant about that aspect of Star Wars was that when they released the new DVDs, the DVDs of the original trilogy without the special editions, it was like the unmarked. It was another way to sell Star Wars, basically. I got a parcel in the post, and I opened it up, and it was from Lucasfilm, and it had a little Lucasfilm embossed card, and it was the 3 DVDs of the original films, and it was just said, "I thought you might like these," and that was for me.
Love Jar Jar.
Love Jar Jar. So yeah, it's funny watching it now. It's funny watching it because it's so overplayed now. When we did the first series, we were all cramming into the office at the comic shop with Pete Serafinowicz watching the trailer for Phantom Menace, thinking this looks like the most brilliant film ever. Little did we know. And the whole thing about the 3 good Star Wars films was something we did in post-production because we learnt the truth in between filming the show and having the show released. So it's a weird one.
I know, because after we filmed it, then we put in jokes. Like there's that thing, that graphic that comes up on screen saying 3 good Star Wars films later, because whilst we were editing sort of word, we got out that it was shit, the new one. Yeah. And you sent me a fax from New York saying how... You did. You sent a fax from New York saying that you were going to throw yourself off the top of the Empire State Building. This is terrible. And you said, like, Jar Jar Binks makes the Ewoks look like Ice Cube from Boys in the Hood, which he then later changed to, like fucking Shark.
Described Serenity, the movie. Is this not the perfect time to announce Space Movie? Before not cough up the money. And can we have Tom Cruise in?
I think the whole point of Space was that it was on the small screen. It was little people living their lives in a big way in a small environment, And I think to have the big gestures that Edgar made as a filmmaker on Space, his technique would look less out of place on the big screen in a way. He was using cinematic technique on the television. That was the point in a way. And I think to put Space on as a film would be defeating the object.
Can I ask about the US version of Space, which we understand is...
Go for it,
Might be good.
I can't believe that you didn't know.
Well, the thing is there is, and it's interesting because it goes on in similar ways, that, like, I think after the first series, LWT, like Granada, have the rights to the show, and, the format was sold after the first series. And I remember, a long time ago, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, meeting somebody in the States about the potential thing, and there was somebody had done, rewritten the first episode. The writer of Dinosaurs had rewritten the first episode. And none of us wanted to read it because it was it was just looking at something that was just alien to us. And I remember kind of having a meeting with somebody who was involved, and they said, and they at that point wanted to maybe do the pilot. And I really wasn't interested because for that very reason, similar reason there wouldn't be a film, is that there's something, part of the charm of Space is it's people in North London acting out stuff from American films. It's Hollywood in kind of suburbia. When that then goes to the States, for me, and especially American TV is usually much more glamorous, it doesn't make any sense. I remember that there was the producer at the time said, yeah, we'd have to change a few things, we'd have to take out the drugs and the swearing, and obviously Mike can't have guns because in America guns are frowned upon. At that point, this was 8 years ago, I knew it was going to be a disaster. Then, more recently, we heard rumblings that McGee, who was responsible for the OC and Charlie's Angels, had bought the rights. But then the next thing I read about it was I read in Variety that not only were they making it, but me and Simon were involved in the same way that Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant were in The Office American version. But they hadn't even called us, nobody got in touch. Didn't even mention Jessica in the Variety article at all. So it was just, I was, as much as I was really disappointed about that it might be happening, and hopefully, I want to keep crying blue murder until hopefully they stop. but it was more the fact that they just insinuated that we were involved, and I had people coming up to me saying, "Oh, so you're doing an American version of Space?" I was like, "I'm not fucking doing it. I'm nothing to do with it." And they never called me. They did call me the day after I put out a very diplomatic "fuck you" on MySpace. and then I got a call. From to say, "Hey, we'd love to get Edgar in to talk about the new. Maybe we could pick his brains." I was thinking, too late. Fuck off.
Take this.
So I'm really, I just think it's a, you know, especially if we never get to do a third series, I don't like the idea that anybody else gets to do anything with it. It just feels like, you know, sort of
If they do
a
this,
child
someone
of mine is being abused.
Someone might ask the question, is there going to be a 10th series of Spaced? I think on one hand you have Spaced, which is kind of the real Spaced, which is, you know, the culmination of a lot of personal experience and a lot of very specific things, and on the other hand you have guy meets girl, they pretend to be coupled to get flat, which is the least interesting thing about that show, I think. You know, it was just a kind of a peg to hang on, what am I saying? A hook to hang it on, and it is not, I mean, it's a fairly kind of solid little, yeah, okay, that's a pitch, but it's not Spaced, that's not what it's about, you know. So.
Speaking as someone who got and very much enjoyed the Colin getting eaten by a crocodile reference, I'm wondering if you know what Gillian Anderson makes Spaced.
I do. Yeah, it was funny actually. When I just did a film with her, and the day that the first day she came in for rehearsals, I met her before once, but the first Bob Whitey, who is the director of the film I did and who was one of the co-creators of Curb Your Enthusiasm, the first thing he said when she sat down at the rehearsal table was, "Oh, Simon did a show where he had a wank over you." And I'd actually given her Spaced before. I'd given her a copy of it, forgetting that there was a scene in it. First episode, Tim had kind of like, you know, insinuated masturbatory fantasies about her. And she's, you know, she thought it was funny, and I got on very well with her. It was very odd. I remember there was a time when Nick and I lived in a house that contained nothing but a wardrobe on its side, a Calagas heater and a video and a telly. And a wok. And an angry ghost. And we used to just watch episodes of The X-Files back to back, and we were kind of like obsessed with it, you know, because it was all we had, so...
And then I'd get in the cupboard and Simon would push lit matches through a hole.
Sometimes the video would end and we'd need to do something. Good times. It was funny to suddenly be on set with her and just sort of hanging out and, you know, and not being that bothered by her, really, you know. It was kind of like, it was, you know, it was funny.
I was just wondering, between Series 1 and Series 2, were there any things which sort of bugged you, which you wanted to change, or what were your thoughts like in that middle bit between Series 1 and Series 2?
I think Series 2 is a kind of distillation of what we liked best about Series 1. So episodes like Episode 2 of Series 1, which is quite sort of meandering, and we kind of, you know, we concentrated on the caper, on the adventure, on the kind of, you know, it's slightly heightened Series 2, and there's, you know, I think there's a very valid and a justified debate about, you know, which ones people prefer, because, you know, Series 2 is like Space times 2 kind of thing. But yeah, we kind of looked at it and thought people loved the dog rescue, and people loved the clubbing, and people loved it when we were out and about and doing stuff, so let's do more of that.
Yeah, it's always a difficult thing, and the same thing goes when we've written films and stuff, is that you're kind of torn between doing what you really want to do and what you think people will like, and you can kind of chase, you know, your tail if you kind of try and sort of listen to the fans too much. It's a difficult thing. It was the thing I remember, like on the website, where people would kind of write in with story ideas, and occasionally we'd written them, we had to ask them to stop, because, you know, some of them were pretty good, and then like if we'd done an episode which like would have been similar to something that they come up with, then we had to say, don't put any story ideas on the internet, please, you know.
Because you'd have to pay them.
Yeah. We don't even get fucking paid anything anyway.
Presumably the budget was not much different for the second series. That's traditional.
It was a bit bigger, but then the ideas were twice as big, so it kind of like, you know, was equally tough. Yeah.
Where, even if the programme is never made, where would your character be now? Julia, do you want to start?
No, I don't want to start.
Who wants to start? You start, Simon. You're in it.
I actually wrote a kind of the end of everybody once, which is, I think Brian eventually, you know, he lived a long, happy life, but then he eventually, obviously, as we all will, died, and but then became incredibly popular posthumously in the future. So his work went for millions and millions of pounds. I think him and Twist got together eventually through some sort of wrangling. Mike ended up with Dexter. Moved moved to South London, which was a massive, you know, big wrench for Tim to see him go. And he saw him off on the train and on the tube. Well, just because you've really moved to South London, that's not nothing to do with it. But he sort of like saw him off in a brief encounter moment, and Mike went off to live his life. We had an episode where Mike got struck by lightning and his moustache got burnt off. He lost
really weak. He lost his powers.
He lost his powers. Twist. We had this. There was one thing I wrote about Twist going into suspended animation and waking up in the future where everybody wore silver and she was disgusted. But Tim and Daisy were always going to get together, and you know, I always foresaw a moment when they were face to face and they suddenly realised what had been staring them, you know, in the face since the first series, and just had this kiss which lasted forever, you know, and just was the most devastating kind of dramatic moment in the history of television. Well, you and me should have.
Why did you look at me like
I thought you were taking the piss.
It's fine.
No, I thought you were taking the piss. I just think it should have been like a real kind of wonderful, you know, wonderful closure, you know, and then from that moment on, everything kind of becomes irrelevant because they, you know, they realised that really they were supposed to be together. So if there had been a third series, I think we would have done our best to make a moment that made every hair on your body stand on end, and had Tim and Daisy, you know, realise that they were in love.
Sweet. We thank everybody with an even bigger round of applause. I just want to remind you of this speech because I think it's very profound and I think it sums up Space and why we're all here. Daisy says it. She says, "We live in a fantasy world. We've just constructed this fake utopia where we never get old and never have to face the responsibilities of adulthood. We're just stretching our childhoods out as far as they can go." And Tim says, "Yeah, I know. We're lucky, aren't we?" I think that applies to all of us in this room. And obviously we wish Jess had been here, she wasn't. So when we applaud everybody, we also applaud Jessica Stevenson, now Hynes, Julia, Katie, Nick, Simon, Edgar and Mark. Big round of applause.